The first thing I saw was her eyes, wide, terrified, reflecting the neon buzz of the midnight truck stop as if the world around her was too big, too cold, and far too dangerous for someone that small. Her voice trembled when she asked if I wanted to buy a toy, but it wasn't the toy that froze my breath. It was the way her fingers shook as she clutched the box, as if holding on to that cheap plastic was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. And in that instant, I felt something break inside me, something I thought I'd buried miles ago on a highway stained with more regrets than miles. Have you ever had a moment when the universe stops, and you know, deep in your bones, that something is terribly wrong? That was the exact moment I felt standing beside my rig, diesel still humming warm beneath the hood, the cold wind scraping across my face like nature itself was warning me. A little girl selling toys at midnight isn't just strange, it's a sign, a scream wrapped in silence. I stepped closer and the smell of gasoline mixed with the metallic sting of the night air wrapped around us like a storm waiting to burst. She looked around as if someone might appear at any second, someone she didn't want to see. Her name, barely whispered, was Emily. The way she said it made my stomach tighten, like she had been told not to speak it out loud too often. And the moment she said it, the weight of every mile I had ever driven crashed on my shoulders. What was a child doing out here, near a remote truck stop where even grown men kept their backs to the wall after dark? What kind of world leaves a little girl standing under flickering neon lights, offering a stranger a toy just to survive another hour? My heartbeat echoed louder than the engines idling around us, a rhythm shaped by instinct, by experience, by that unspoken code every real trucker understands. We protect the vulnerable. We step between danger and the innocent. And something in Emily's eyes told me danger was closer than I could see. Before I even spoke, I felt a surge of anger rising, not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that sharpens everything. The wind carried distant laughter from drunk men near the convenience store, tires screeched somewhere along the dark highway, and an empty soda can rolled across the pavement, scraping like a blade against concrete. Everything felt too alive, too reactive, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Emily tugged at my sleeve gently, almost apologetic, and whispered that she wasn't supposed to talk to me for too long. Her voice cracked on the last two words. I didn't know why yet, but the tremor in them told me everything. Someone was watching her, someone who shouldn't be. And suddenly the shadows around the fuel pumps felt deeper, thicker, like they were swallowing the edges of the world. If you're hearing this, understand something. Truckers aren't heroes. We're tired men with heavy hearts and heavier loads. But sometimes the road gives you a moment where you either act or become part of the problem. And before I tell you what Emily said, the thing that still shakes me to this day, let me ask you this. What would you have done if you were standing there in my boots, staring into the frightened eyes of a little girl who clearly needed help, long before you ever arrived? Emily looked up at me with those anxious eyes, clutching the small cardboard box to her chest like a shield. The cold breeze pushed her hair across her face, and she brushed it away with the kind of gentleness that broke my heart even more. She shouldn't have been out here, not at this hour, not in this place. I knelt down slowly so I wouldn't scare her, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and I asked her where her parents were, but she didn't answer. She only glanced toward the far end of the lot, where the shadows seemed to swallow the light whole. Every instinct I had sharpened in that instant. The diesel fumes mixed with the faint smell of burnt rubber drifting from the road, and it all felt wrong, too quiet, too tense. Emily whispered that she had a little time left before she had to go back. Those words chilled me more than the night wind ever could. Kids don't talk like that unless someone has drilled fear into them. I followed her gaze, scanning the edge of the truck stop where a dim light flickered above an abandoned service shed, and though I didn't see anyone, I felt watched. I motioned for Emily to step closer to my truck, thinking maybe the open space and the headlights would make her feel safer. She hesitated, biting her lip hard as if just moving closer to me might get her in trouble. Her small hand trembled when she finally placed the toy box on the step of my cab. It was an old plastic action figure, worn, scratched, the kind of toy a child wouldn't give up unless she absolutely had to. My stomach twisted when I realized it probably wasn't something she was trying to sell, but something she was being forced to. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering like it was struggling for life, casting short bursts of red and blue over Emily's face. In that fractured light, I noticed a bruise along her jawline, faint but unmistakable, half hidden beneath the hair she kept tucking away. My hands clenched without thinking. I'd seen enough in my years on the road, runaways, hustlers, lost souls, to know when someone had been hurt. But a child, that hit a part of me I tried to bury long ago. When I asked who she was supposed to return to, she stepped back immediately, shaking her head so fast the toy box rattled. Fear tightened her little body like a coiled spring. She whispered a name, Marcus, barely audible, like saying it too loud would summon him from the darkness. And that name hit me with a wave of dread I couldn't explain. Marcus, the kind of name that carried weight, authority, control, someone she feared enough to obey, but hated enough that her voice cracked when she spoke it. I stood up slowly, my bones creaking from the long haul I'd driven earlier. The night stretched out in silence, except for the faint hum of highway noise. I kept my eyes on the service shed where Emily had glanced earlier, watching for any movement. I'd dealt with men like Marcus before, cowards who lurked in shadows, controlling the vulnerable because it made them feel powerful. Emily tugged at my sleeve again, her voice trembling as she begged me not to go looking for him. She said he gets angry when people interfere, but the thing about the road is, you see too many things you wish you hadn't, and you learn one rule that matters more than all the others. If you walk away from someone who needs help, the guilt will follow you longer than the miles ever will. I told her gently that she wasn't alone anymore. She stared at me confused as if those words were foreign to her, and before I could say anything else, a loud clang echoed from the direction of the service shed, metal hitting concrete, making both of us jump. The metallic clang echoed through the night like a warning shot, bouncing off the empty asphalt and rattling something deep inside my chest. Emily froze, her small fingers clawing at the fabric of my jacket, as if she expected the darkness itself to swallow her whole. I instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her with my body, my eyes locked on the direction of the noise. The truck stop suddenly felt too silent, too still, as if every engine, every breath of wind, every sound had been sucked out of the world. Danger has a way of announcing itself without words, and that single clang told me we weren't alone. I walked a few steps forward, boots grinding over gravel, my breath forming thin clouds in the cold air. The shadows around the service shed seemed to shift, moving with a slow, calculated rhythm. My pulse hammered in my ears, but years on the road had trained me to keep my body calm even when my instincts screamed otherwise. Emily tugged at my hand, whispering for me to stop, pleading for me not to go any closer. But I couldn't ignore whatever, or whoever, was hiding out there, not when a child's safety was on the line. Then a figure stepped halfway into the glow of the flickering light, not fully visible, but enough that I could see the outline of a man leaning against the corner of the shed, as if he had been watching us the entire time. His posture was too casual, too confident, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing someone smaller than you depends on your mercy, and it made my blood boil. He dragged something metallic across the ground, a crowbar maybe, which explained the earlier sound. The man tilted his head slightly, studying me like someone sizing up a threat. Emily's hand slipped into mine, trembling so violently I felt her fear pulse up my arm. She whispered that this was Marcus. Hearing the name again, this time dripping from her terrified voice, sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Marcus lifted the crowbar, tapping it lightly against his boot, not aggressively, but deliberately, provocation disguised as boredom. "You buying toys now?" he called out, his voice smooth but venomous underneath. It wasn't a question, it was a challenge, a warning. My jaw tightened as I stepped forward, keeping Emily behind me without breaking eye contact with him. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, dimming and brightening like a heartbeat skipping. Every time it flickered, Marcus's face appeared and disappeared, carved by shadows, expression unreadable. He told Emily to get back to the shed, his tone changing instantly, hard, commanding, the voice of a man who believed he owned her. Emily flinched but didn't move, clinging to my arm like it was the only safe place in her world. I could feel her silent plea, her desperation for someone, anyone, to stand up for her, and I knew then that walking away wasn't an option. I told Marcus she wasn't going anywhere with him. My voice came out low, steady, the kind of tone that makes grown men stop and think twice. Marcus didn't think twice. Instead, he laughed, a cold, empty sound that crawled beneath my skin. He stepped closer into the light, revealing a scar across his cheek and a cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes were sharp, calculating, the eyes of someone who had spent years surviving by preying on fear. He said I didn't know what I was getting into. Maybe he was right, maybe I had no idea, but I knew one thing for certain. Emily needed someone to fight for her. Marcus took another step forward, gripping the crowbar tighter. The metal scraped the ground, sending sparks dancing briefly across the concrete. I felt Emily's breath hitch behind me. The night seemed to tighten around us, the air becoming heavier, thicker, like the world itself was bracing for what was about to unfold. And as I stood there, facing down a man who'd clearly done more harm than he'd ever admit, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't afraid of me. That meant he'd been doing this for a long time. Marcus's confidence wasn't the kind that came from strength. It was the kind born from habit. the routine of hurting others without consequences. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Emily's fear made sense now. This wasn't a one-time situation. This was a pattern, a cycle, something she'd been trapped in far longer than any child should ever endure. The way Marcus's shoulders rolled back, relaxed, like he already knew how the night would end, it made my blood run hot. He'd done this before. He expected to do it again, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I stepped forward just enough to put myself fully between Emily and him. The gravel shifted under my boots, and Marcus's eyes flicked down to the movement, calculating, measuring. The cigarette's glow briefly illuminated the scar across his cheek before the ember dimmed again. He exhaled a slow stream of smoke, letting it drift lazily through the cold air. It felt intentional, like a show of dominance, like he wasn't intimidated by a trucker twice his size. But intimidation wasn't what I came for. I came for truth, for answers, for Emily. Emily whispered my name, Evan, barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might make Marcus snap. Hearing her say my name with that trembling voice pulled something fierce out of me. I'd been on these roads long enough to know monsters didn't always hide in dark forests. Sometimes they stood under neon lights with smug smiles and casual cruelty. Marcus said Emily owed him money, that he was teaching her responsibility. The words slithered out of his mouth with a casualness that made me sick. No child should ever owe a grown man anything. I told him he wasn't taking her anywhere. My voice was steady, solid, the tone that comes from years of long nights, heavy loads, and too many roadside regrets. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he took another drag from his cigarette, his eyes never leaving mine. He said I should mind my own business, that I didn't know how things worked around here. I did know, though. Men like him thrived on silence, on fear, on people pretending they didn't see what was happening right in front of them. He counted on that silence the way others count on air. Then he pointed the crowbar at me, slowly, deliberately, as if marking a line in the dirt between us. The metal glinted under the buzzing light and Emily gasped behind me. Marcus's smirk widened like he enjoyed the fear he caused. He said Emily wasn't my problem, but he was wrong. When someone is this scared, this alone, this desperate, they become your problem the moment fate puts them in your path. And the road had placed Emily in mine for a reason I couldn't ignore. The tension stretched thin between us, tightening like a cable pulled to its limit. The truck stop around us faded into background noise. The sputtering neon, the distant rumble of engines, the whisper of wind scraping across the asphalt. All of it fell away until there was only the three of us caught in the stillness of a moment that could break in any direction. Marcus shifted his stance subtly, weight leaning forward, ready for something. I knew that posture. I'd seen it in bar fights, highway disputes, and late-night confrontations gone wrong. Emily pressed her forehead against my back, her small hands gripping my jacket. I could feel her shaking with each breath. The realization hit me like a freight train. She wasn't just afraid of what Marcus might do. She was afraid of what he had already done. That fear wasn't new. It was etched into her bones. And if I walked away, she'd carry that weight for the rest of her life. I took one slow step forward, locking eyes with Marcus, silently telling him the night wasn't going his way. He noticed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. That flicker of uncertainty in Marcus's eyes was small, barely more than a crack in the armor he'd worn for who knows how long. But cracks grow, and I intended to tear it wide open. He shifted his grip on the crowbar, the metal catching a sliver of light as he raised it just enough to remind me it was there. The tension between us thickened, wrapping around my lungs like a vice. But fear wasn't what held me still. It was focus, pure, steady focus. If this turned into a fight, I needed Marcus to make the first move, not because I was scared, because I needed Emily out of the line of fire. Emily tugged gently on my jacket, whispering that Marcus didn't like when people talked back to him. Her warning wasn't nervous. It was terrified, a learned fear, the kind that comes from experience, from punishment. Her voice cracked halfway through as though she expected Marcus to lash out just for hearing her speak. I felt something inside me snap then, not impulsive rage, but a cold, deliberate anger, the kind that settles deep and refuses to be ignored. I crouched slightly, putting one hand behind me to steady her, never breaking eye contact with Marcus. He took a step closer, cigarette ash drifting down his shirt as he tapped the end with casual arrogance. The crowbar scraped across the ground as he dragged it forward, the metallic sound twisting through the silence like a warning growl. He asked if I thought I was some kind of hero. The way he said it, mocking, cold, told me he'd met men who tried to stand up to him before, and he'd beaten them down. Not today. Not with Emily watching. Not with a little girl who'd already seen more cruelty than any child ever should. I told him I wasn't a hero. Heroes wear capes and save cities. I was just a trucker, bone-tired, road-worn, and barely hanging on to my own piece. But I also told him something else, something that made his smirk falter again. I said that sometimes all it takes is one person, one stubborn, exhausted stranger, to draw a line in the dirt and refuse to move. His jaw twitched. He didn't like that. He shifted forward again, this time faster, aggression bleeding through the cracks of his calm facade. But as he moved, I stepped sideways, blocking his path to Emily with a precision born from experience. The night pressed in tighter, the air growing colder, the neon lights flickering more violently, as if the electricity itself sensed the brewing storm. Marcus glanced around, maybe hoping someone else would step in, someone who would back him up or at least witness him asserting control. But no one came. The other truckers were asleep, the convenience store door was closed, and the highway stretched out like a dark ribbon into nowhere. It was just him, Emily, and me. Three souls suspended in a moment that felt like the edge of something irreversible. Emily whispered that Marcus made her sell toys because nobody helps for free. That sentence cut deeper than any blade. The resignation in her voice, the acceptance of suffering as a rule of life. It was too much. My fists tightened at my sides, knuckles cracking, but I forced myself to stay steady. Losing control wouldn't help her. She needed protection, not chaos. Marcus raised the crowbar a little higher now, letting it hang over his shoulder with a lazy confidence that didn't match the tension in his eyes. He was getting nervous. Good. Nervous men make mistakes. I took one more deliberate step forward, putting myself squarely between him and the girl. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It simply dropped into that deep, unwavering register I saved for situations where words mattered more than fists. I told him Emily wasn't going anywhere with him tonight, tomorrow, or ever again. The moment those words left my mouth, Marcus's expression hardened into something dark and dangerous, the kind of look a man gives when he realizes he's losing control of the only power he's ever had. And with that look, the night shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Something was about to break. Marcus's grip tightened around the crowbar until the metal groaned under the pressure of his fingers. His jaw clenched, and the cigarette finally fell from his lips, landing in a faint sizzle on the cold pavement. That tiny sound, barely audible, felt like a fuse being lit. The air around us thickened, trembling with a tension so sharp it could cut skin. Emily pressed her small hands against my back, and I felt her trembling seep into my bones. I'd seen fear before, but hers carried a lifetime of shadows in a child's body. Marcus spat to the side and stepped forward with a swagger that tried to mask the anxiety creeping into his eyes. His boots crunched over broken glass near the shed, each step deliberate, meant to intimidate. He told me I had 10 seconds to move, that Emily was his responsibility, that he kept her alive. The venom in his voice was thick, poisonous. I didn't move, not an inch. The silence stretched between us like a rope pulled tight, waiting to snap, and Marcus's sneer deepened at the realization that I wasn't playing by his rules. The wind shifted, carrying the distant howl of a semi speeding down the highway, its Doppler wail slicing through the stillness. My truck's engine clicked softly as it cooled behind me, each metallic tick echoing like a countdown. Emily whispered that Marcus didn't like losing. There was no need to tell me. I could read it on his face, the way his shoulders squared, the way he bounced his weight from foot to foot, the way his fingers flexed around the crowbar. He was itching for violence, craving it even, not because he was brave, but because cruelty was the only language he understood. I raised my hands slowly, palms open, not in surrender, but to show Emily I was in control. Marcus misinterpreted it as weakness and took 2 quick steps forward, closing the distance between us. The smell of stale smoke clung to him like a second skin. His eyes were wild now, flicking between me and the girl. He hissed that I had no idea what Emily had cost him. The phrasing made my stomach twist. People don't talk about children like that unless something is deeply, horrifically wrong. And in that moment, the truth crystallized. Emily wasn't with him by choice. She was trapped. I told him again, calm, firm, that Emily wasn't leaving with him. The words hung in the air like a verdict, and Marcus finally snapped. He lunged forward, swinging the crowbar in a wide arc aimed straight at my ribs. Time slowed. The cold wind stung my face. The neon lights flickered overhead, and Emily screamed behind me, a sound so raw it cut through the night like broken glass. I stepped into the swing instead of away from it, throwing off Marcus's rhythm. The crowbar grazed my jacket, tearing the fabric but missing flesh as I shoved him backward with the full weight of my shoulder. Marcus stumbled, cursing, his boots skidding on the gravel. The crowbar clattered for a split second against his leg before he regained his grip. His expression twisted, not from pain but from humiliation. He wasn't expecting resistance. certainly not from someone who stayed calm while he swung. Humiliation can make a dangerous man reckless. And reckless men are predictable. He roared something incoherent, charging again, blind with fury. I felt Emily retreat behind the tire of my truck, seeking shelter. I positioned myself between her and Marcus. Every nerve in my body locked onto the fight. This time Marcus came in lower, faster, trying to catch me off guard, but rage had stripped away his precision. I caught his wrist midway through the swing, the crowbar trembling between us as our strengths collided. His breath reeked of fear disguised as aggression. He leaned in close, spitting curses, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I tightened my grip, forcing his arm back until he gasped. The crowbar slipped from his fingers, clattering across the pavement and spinning into the shadows. For the first time since he stepped out of the darkness, Marcus looked scared. The moment the crowbar clattered away, something shifted in Marcus's face. A crack in his bravado, a fracture in the cruelty he'd worn like armor. His eyes darted toward the fallen weapon, but I stepped fully into his line of sight, blocking it, forcing him to face me without the comfort of cold steel in his hand. The wind howled across the open lot, tugging at my jacket, carrying the sharp scent of diesel and distant rain. Marcus's breath came in uneven bursts now, his chest rising and falling too fast. Fear had finally reached him, crawling up his spine like ice. He shoved me with both hands, but it was weak, sloppy, desperate. I barely moved. His boot slipped on the gravel as he staggered backward, and for a split second he looked small beneath the flickering neon lights, like a bully caught alone without his tools. Emily peeked from behind my truck's tire, her eyes wide, her cheeks streaked with tears that glistened in the dim light. I could feel her hope trembling in the air, fragile as a whisper. Marcus saw her watching, and his expression twisted with something darker, shame mixed with rage. He hated being seen like this, especially by her. He lunged toward Emily instead of me, a coward's move, a predictable one. I intercepted him before he got 2 steps in her direction, slamming my shoulder into him with enough force to send him sprawling across the pavement. He hit the ground hard, the thud echoing through the quiet truck stop. Emily cried out, covering her ears as if the sound alone might trigger another outburst. Marcus rolled onto his back, gasping. The wind knocked out of him. I stood over him, my breath heavy, my fists clenched, every instinct telling me to end this for good. But I wasn't here to destroy him. I was here to save her. He scrambled backward on his elbows, gravel scraping his palms, his bravado evaporating with every desperate movement. He muttered that I didn't understand, that Emily was all he had left, that nobody else cared if she lived or died. The words were slurred with panic, not sincerity. I'd heard excuses like that before, from men who confused ownership with affection. I knelt down just enough to meet his eyes, letting him see the truth in mine. The road had taught me the difference between broken men and monsters. Marcus wasn't broken. He chose this. He fed on it. A car engine rumbled somewhere far off, but the lot remained empty, isolated. Just us and the neon hum above. Marcus tried to stand, but his legs wobbled. I grabbed his collar and pulled him close enough for him to hear the grit in my voice, as I told him that Emily wasn't going back with him. Not now, not ever. His breath hitched, panic rising again. He spat a curse at me, but it lacked sharpness. He wasn't trying to intimidate anymore. He was trying to cling to the last thread of control he had left. He broke free of my grip and stumbled toward the shed, maybe hoping to retrieve something, maybe hoping to escape. I didn't need to know which. I stepped between him and the shadows, my stance solid, unmovable. The light above us flickered violently, plunging the lot into brief darkness before buzzing back alive. When the glow returned, I saw Marcus freeze, not because of me, but because Emily had stepped out from behind the truck, standing in the open despite her shaking. Her tiny voice rose, cracked but courageous, telling him she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Marcus stared at her, stunned, and in that instant, I saw the truth. Fear wasn't the only thing Emily carried. There was strength in her, a small flame that had survived every storm he'd thrown at her. And now, finally, she wasn't alone. The realization struck him harder than any hit I could have delivered. His shoulders slumped, his expression hollowing out, the last of his power bleeding away into the cold night air. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. He just stood there, frozen in the dim glow of the failing neon light, staring at the little girl who had finally found her voice. The wind swept across the lot, carrying the rustle of distant highway traffic and the faint creak of a loose sign swaying above the convenience store. Emily's shoulders were shaking, but she didn't step back. Her courage didn't roar. It whispered. But sometimes a whisper is louder than any scream. Marcus seemed stunned by it, like he was seeing her for the first time and realizing she wasn't the terrified shadow he'd shaped her into. I walked slowly toward Emily, making sure to place myself between her and Marcus without making her feel hidden or silenced. She looked up at me, her eyes glossy but steady, and I could feel the weight of what she'd just done. Some people don't understand how much strength lives in a single timid no when it's directed at someone who's held power over you for too long. Emily had taken her first step out of that darkness, and though she trembled, she didn't back down. I rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, making sure she knew she wasn't standing alone. Marcus's breathing hitched as the reality sank in, his face contorted, anger, confusion, desperation twisting together into something ugly. He barked her name, once, maybe hoping she would snap back into obedience, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground. The sound of her name just drifted into the cold air and died there, without power. Marcus's lips parted as though he wanted to shout again, but nothing came out. He looked smaller now, cornered not by fists or force but by a child's quiet defiance and the presence of someone willing to protect her. He staggered backward toward the service shed, muttering under his breath, pacing in short, frantic steps. He searched the ground for the crowbar, but it had rolled deep into the shadows beneath a row of stacked pallets. His panic grew sharper with each second he couldn't find it. Without the weapon, without Emily's obedience, without the intimidation he relied on, Marcus was just a frightened man unraveling in the cold. I watched him carefully, ready to move if he tried anything, but he seemed trapped inside his own mind, fighting battles I couldn't see. Emily stepped closer to me and I could hear her breathing evening out, slow and shaky but no longer frantic. She whispered that she didn't want to go with him, not ever again. Each word trembled, but they were filled with something new. Resolve. She clutched the toy box against her chest, the worn cardboard dented from being held too tightly for too long. It struck me that the toy wasn't something she was selling for money. It was something she'd held on to because it reminded her she was still a child, not the tool Marcus had turned her into. Marcus finally stopped pacing and looked at us with a hollow stare. Defeat sat heavily in his eyes, but beneath it, something darker still flickered, resentment, the kind that festers. I felt Emily tense beside me. Even defeated, he was dangerous. Cowards often are. He shouted that I would regret this, that I didn't know who I was messing with, his voice cracking under the weight of his unraveling confidence. But his threats no longer carried the punch he intended. They were empty, echoes of a control he no longer had. I stepped forward, placing myself directly in his line of sight, my stance unshakable. I told him again, slowly, clearly, that Emily wasn't going anywhere with him, that he needed to walk away before the night got worse for him. For a second, he looked like he might fight, like pride was clawing at his insides. But then something inside him collapsed. His shoulders dropped, his jaw slackened, and he mumbled a string of curses as he backed away toward the darkness behind the shed. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He just drifted backward until the night swallowed him whole. For several long seconds after Marcus disappeared into the darkness, I kept my eyes fixed on the spot where he'd vanished. The night felt heavier somehow, thick with the echo of his threats and the silence he left behind. The neon lights buzzed overhead like nervous insects, casting fractured colors across the pavement. Emily stayed glued to my side, her small frame trembling with the leftover shock of everything that had just happened. I didn't tell her it was over. Not yet. On the road, danger doesn't vanish just because it walks away. Sometimes it circles back. When I finally turned toward her, Emily looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. Fear fading into relief, relief melting into exhaustion. Her eyes shimmered beneath the harsh lights, and the weight of the night hung on her like a coat 2 sizes too heavy. I knelt in front of her, leveling myself with her gaze. I didn't ask if she was okay. Children like Emily aren't okay after nights like this. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Did she trust me? She hesitated for just a second, then nodded, a small, fragile movement that carried the strength of a mountain. I led her to the passenger side of my truck, opening the door slowly so the creak wouldn't startle her. The warm scent of old leather and diesel drifted out, a familiar comfort from my countless nights on the road. Emily hesitated before climbing in, gripping the toy box with both hands, holding it close like a lifeline. She looked so small against the backdrop of the massive rig, the dashboard lights reflecting softly across her frightened face. When she finally settled into the seat, she exhaled shakily, as if being inside the cab gave her permission to breathe again. Before I climbed in, I scanned the truck stop one more time. The shed stood still, no sign of movement. The convenience store lights flickered inside, but the door remained closed. Trucks sat silent in the far lot, their drivers unaware of the storm that had just broken in the shadows. Everything appeared quiet, but quiet doesn't always mean safe. I checked again, every corner, every shadow, letting instinct guide my eyes. Satisfied enough to move, I finally pulled myself into the cab and shut the door, the heavy thud echoing like the closing of a chapter. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper when she asked if Marcus would come back. Her hands fidgeted with the toy box, fingers tracing the edges like she expected it to crumble under her touch. I told her the truth. He might try. Men like Marcus cling to the power they lose, even when it slips through their fingers like sand. But I promised her this. He wouldn't get to her again. Not while she was with me. Not while I still had breath in my lungs and miles of road ahead. The promise hung between us, steady and unbroken. The truck's engine rumbled to life beneath us, vibrating through the cab with a familiar rhythm that calmed my nerves and, judging by the way Emily relaxed slightly, hers too. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but empty concrete and drifting dust. I shifted the rig into gear, the deep mechanical groan filling the cab like a steady heartbeat. Emily leaned her head against the window, eyes still wide but no longer filled with panic, just uncertainty, the kind that comes after surviving something you never should have faced. As I pulled slowly out of the lot, I felt a storm of thoughts churning behind my ribs. What was Marcus planning before we arrived? How long had Emily been trapped in his grasp? And most importantly, what would have happened to her if I hadn't stopped here tonight? Fate has strange ways of putting people in your path. You can call it coincidence, divine intervention, or just dumb luck. But as we rolled back onto the empty highway surrounded by miles of cold darkness, I knew one thing for certain. The road didn't bring me to Emily by accident. The highway stretched out before us like a ribbon of faint silver under the moonlight, its endless hum vibrating through the steering wheel and into my bones. Emily watched the road in silence, her breath fogging the window every few seconds, each breath a reminder that she was still processing everything, trying to make sense of a world that had been too cruel for far too long. The cab's dim lights cast a warm glow over her face, softening the hardness fear had carved into her features. She clutched the toy box against her chest like it was the only solid thing left in her life, and maybe it was, until this moment. I glanced at her gently, keeping my voice low so it didn't press against her fragile calm. I told her she wasn't going back. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. Not while I was behind the wheel. She didn't say anything at first, but after a long stretch of silent miles, she whispered that no one had ever said those words to her before. I felt the weight of that settle in the cab like a shadow. A child shouldn't have to cling to the idea of safety like it's a fantasy, but that's what she'd been living. A world where hope came only in fleeting moments, stolen between fear and obedience. The road signs blurred past, lonely markers guiding us deeper into the night. But for once, I didn't feel alone out there. Emily leaned slightly closer, not enough to touch me, just enough to let me know she felt safer now than she had in a long time. Her eyelids drooped with exhaustion, heavy from adrenaline and fear draining out of her system. I kept one hand steady on the wheel while the other reached quietly into the back seat for the blanket I kept for cold nights. I draped it over her gently, making sure not to startle her. She held onto the toy box under the blanket, but her grip had loosened. She asked me where we were going, her voice small but no longer shaking. I told her I knew a place, a safe stop where a friend of mine, a woman named Carla, worked the night shift at a 24-hour diner. Carla had a heart bigger than Texas and never turned away someone in need. Emily's shoulders relaxed at the sound of stability, of direction, of someone besides me who might care about what happened to her. She didn't smile, not yet, but the tension in her body eased the tiniest bit. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive all at once, it trickles in soft and slow. As we approached the diner, its warm lights glowing like a beacon in the darkness, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just another night on the road. This was a moment that would stick with me long after the miles washed it into memory. I parked the truck carefully, letting the engine idle as I watched Emily breathe deeply under the blanket, finally letting her guard down. She looked so small, curled up in the cab of a stranger's truck, trusting me more than she'd trusted anyone in years, and I felt that responsibility settle into my bones. When I finally spoke, it wasn't about the danger we'd faced, or the threats Marcus had made, or the uncertainty of tomorrow. It was about her. I told Emily that life on the road had taught me one thing: there's always someone worth fighting for, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, a flicker of something warm replaced the fear. Maybe it wasn't hope yet, but it was close. I helped her down from the cab, keeping a protective hand near her shoulder as we walked toward the diner's glowing entrance, the promise of warmth waiting inside. And as the door opened, spilling golden light across her tired face, I felt the story settle into place inside me. This wasn't just a night I survived. This was a night I was meant to live. A night where a trucker like me, road-weary, hardened, carrying his own scars, had the chance to protect someone whose world had never protected her back. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then hear this. These highways are full of stories like Emily's, stories that need to be heard, stories that remind us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a whispered plea at midnight near a truck stop. If this story reached you, really reached you, then join me. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a like so more people can hear the truths most folks never see on the road. And stick around for the next story, because every mile carries a lesson, every stranger carries a secret, and every night brings someone who needs a protector. Out here, we don't choose the people who cross our path, but we can choose to be the person who stands up for them. The road continues, and so does this journey. Stay with me. There's more ahead.